Hello, everyone, and welcome back to From the Stand for our first episode of The Shift with myself, Jackie Winz, and my buddy, man, Jason Rhea. How are you? How you doing?
Doing good, Jackie. Happy to be here. Excited that we actually get to start talking ball with games coming up this week. So really excited.
Awesome. I know, like about a couple years ago, we started talking all about softball back in the back channels, X, everything. And so this sort of has been a little bit of a dream for us, first creating From the Stands, and then finally having our podcast.
Yeah.
I can't believe we made it till today, and it's all coming true. But first off, I'm going to give a little bit of a shout out to Jason in terms of his world and just overall building, writing for softball, doing all these different things. So first off, thanks for contributing to the game in multiple different ways, but also giving back to the fans in this way. So shout out to you, man.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been like I said, it's been a journey over the last 3 or 4 years, just kind of hanging out with you and some of the guys and gals, on the Twitter sphere. The X sphere now, I guess is what you call it. But yeah, no, it's been exciting, and I think we all the good thing is we all have a unique and consistent passion for the game and want to see the game grow in any way that we can. So yeah, it's thrilling for me to be able to do what I'm doing and with the great people at Softball America, and I'm excited to keep rolling.
Awesome, man. Well, we have a big slate today, especially with opening weekend coming. Thank goodness. We've been waiting way too long for this. And so just for the fans out there who are listening, we're going to start every show with a team breakdown. We're going to start with OU for today because we know them best. And so we can probably give you the best breakdown before the season has even started on them. But you, the fans, really determine who that next team for that following week is going to be. All right, so feel free in the comments, DMs, send us who you want us to break down. You can watch the opening weekend and then tell us whatever you'd like. But we'll do our best to cover as many teams as possible. So let's start with them. The good old Sooners. What are your opening thoughts on them for this coming weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very intriguing to obviously every year from an Oklahoma standpoint, but given coming into the year, this is obviously the first year that they're not coming off of a national championship over the last 4 or 5 years, right? So I think one of the things that'll be intriguing for me to watch is just the fire that they come out with, right? I mean, I think the schedule is, I mean, and we'll get into this in terms of some opening week schedule, but the schedule is a little bit tougher for the opening weekend for Oklahoma, than it has been in the past. But I think this team, Patty has gushed about this team over and over in the offseason, and think even, I think so she is very confident about what type of team that they're going to have this year, even more so. I mean, I think even more so than last year. I think coming off of the loss of all of those seniors last year, I don't know that she knew what to expect, and I think at times she talked about how much they overachieved even what her thoughts were for them last year. So I think she's back to a position where she expects them to be, I mean, even better than they were a year ago. Like I said, you had a lot of new faces, Gabby Garcia, Nelly McEnroe Marinas, that didn't really play a whole lot, and I think Gabby Garcia really kind of took everyone by storm nationally, right? I mean, I don't think a whole lot of people, unless you follow recruiting really closely, knew what type of player she was, and I think she exceeded a lot of people's expectations. So certainly, there's a couple of points where you're just kind of interested to see how it's going to come together, how it's going to gel. In terms of the pitching staff, I think in terms of, what does it look like at first base, but they've got a ton of talent, should be able to, I mean, they didn't drop off hardly at all from a home run perspective last year. Even, I think per game, they actually hit more home runs average than the previous years, which is kind of crazy to know with what they lost. Right. So yeah, no, I think, obviously for Oklahoma, it's really national championship or bust, right? But I think it's one of those things that we'll see how they progress through the year, but should be able to have a stacked lineup, should be able to hit the ball really well. So it'll be interesting to see how that lineup kind of comes together and materializes.
Absolutely. I think one of the large questions that sort of looms and has loomed in the offseason, with Sid leaving and graduating and moving on, is who really is at first base. And I know that Patty had mentioned that it may change based on matchup. And I think that's what sort of confuses a lot of people in terms of, what does it mean? Does it change by matchup? Do you need speed in the outfield? Do you need veteran leadership for certain, opponents? I think that sort of has let the OU fan base create some nervousness. But if I were to look at it overall this season, in my opinion, I'm projecting probably Barker to be, your number one after a while. Like I said, I'm going to leave it up to Patty in terms of matchups and what that looks like. But in terms of consistency, I think we do see Barker settle in if she takes the reins.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's probably what it'll look like opening weekend. And I think what you saw with her last year, Jackie, was the fact that she was, particularly towards the end of the year, like her bat was too good to keep out of the lineup, right? I mean, we saw Hannah Core, who's obviously now with Nebraska, was kind of playing that, that outfield position, and then Barker just kind of overtook her towards the end of the season, and then, like I said, hit the ball really well. So yeah, I would expect that to be what it looks like. I mean, I think you'll see a lot of Alyssa Parker. I think two-way player for the Sooners this year, getting in the circle, and then also playing first base or wherever she materializes out there. So yeah, I mean, it's a good problem to have, right? And then we'll see if Pickering plays at all. I'm sure there'll be some times during the year where they may shift some things around and put Barker in the outfield and let Pickering play a little bit of first base. But yeah, I mean, I think with losing Sid, and we've talked about this a little bit in the offseason, but with losing Sid Standers, I think it was one of those things where, from a fan base perspective, a lot of people loved her, but would get very frustrated with her, right? I mean, I think the numbers that she had in her freshman year with Arizona State, she was never able to consistently, put those numbers up. But I think on the other side of it, how good she was on the defensive end, locking down one of those corners. So yeah, I think that will be one of the big questions outside. And I know we'll probably talk about the pitching staff a little bit more in depth, but yeah, I think from a defensive perspective, obviously knowing that's Patty's, what she cares about almost more than anything is being really sound and really prolific on the defensive side of the ball. So making sure that they've got that locked down will be interesting to see as they go through the year, not only just to start off the year, as they go through the year, who meshes best, who plays the most defense and are the best defense, and then obviously has that stick in the lineup as well.
Absolutely. One thing I like to mention, and before the season, Kai Miner, when she was committed to us and signed with us, you sort of knew the athleticism that was coming, but it wasn't really talked about, right? Of everybody coming in, it wasn't really talked about too much until fall ball started, and everyone went, whoa, what does that look like? With a change in center field, of course, and having her out there as a freshman, often compared to the likes of Jada Coleman, different, but in terms of that type of athleticism, something familiar that we've seen in a way, but also a freshman. So one thing I like to say to the OU fan base is you're going to expect an amazing freshman in the center, but also allow her for a little opening day mistakes if that happens, especially when you're, in communication. Also, if you are moving Pickering in and out of that spot, right, that communication has to ebb and flow with the outfield. So, just giving a little Oklahoma, Sooner Nation, just a little bit of, a little patience of that building. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw one or two miscues there, but she is so athletic and is going to be so fun to watch. And something I don't want to necessarily glaze over, because while it's being talked about, of course, it wasn't about a year ago. So I'm excited that she's able to make that breakthrough and show us what she's got. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, completely agree. I think a lot of fans will certainly notice the comparisons to Jada, right? And I think the one thing that was good to see from a fall ball perspective is she did struggle early on at the plate, but she did seem to adjust and have better at bats towards the end of the fall ball season. So I think it'll be interesting to see what her plate appearances look like early on, especially against a couple of season pitchers that Oklahoma's going to see. Opening weekend, if she's kind of a small ball, try to keep the ball on the ground and beat it out. But yeah, the speed is, I think, it's something that gives Oklahoma a little bit more of an advantage in terms of center field defensively, something like they didn't have last year as much of. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how she plays and how she fits into that role.
Absolutely. And I also think that there's There is this competitive spirit, right? They come back, as Patty said, strong, maybe one of the strongest teams that she's seen in a while or ever. And it's a lot of competition internally. Captains aren't going to be named. You're going to let that naturally rise within the different positions and different areas on the field. And one thing that somebody had asked me is, where do you think the breakthrough is? Like, if you're a freshman, or if you're, Malloy or Helton, or anybody else, right? That's not on the starting lineup. How do you break through? And I think it's going to be sort of like what you talked about with Kai, a little bit of, okay, we need consistency. And if you're not hot, you're opening a door. And so, we sort of saw last year with Dayton, and, in the postseason just absolutely killed it, right? But struggled a little bit, hot and cold. There's going to be times this year where sometimes you can work it out, right? Maybe it's a game or two, but if you're not figuring it out, then there's a whole line of power ready, and people who can plug and play. So I'm interested to see how that plays out with such competition. Because it's this game is all about that. So how does that mesh out? And who is that consistent bat, and who is able to even step in, right? Because that's important as well. If you're going to be on a journey to the Women's College World Series, you need people to step up, even coming in and playing as somebody gets cold or hot. So something to think about. A couple questions that were asked earlier today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, this is the number one recruiting class for a reason, right? So these freshmen will have ample opportunities. I think you think of Kai Minor and Kendall Wells as probably the two biggest ones in terms of being able to impact immediately, right? But Alyssa Parker as well, as we talked about. And, from an infield perspective, Lexi McDaniel is probably one of those that hasn't really gotten a whole lot of notoriety in terms of being able to be someone that comes in and plays immediately, obviously because of the position she plays on the infield, and really that being pretty solidified for Oklahoma outside of first base. But yeah, they'll have a lot more this year, competitive balance in terms of challenging each other to be the best that they can be, and be live up to the Oklahoma standard. So that will be fun to watch, especially in some of those games where some of those younger freshmen get an opportunity to play, and maybe not so much of a pressure-packed situation early on.
Absolutely. And talk about Wells. In terms of the catcher position, there's been a lot of questions, right? Emmerling comes back, so we have some veteran presence, and we know that she can hit a ball pretty well. When she makes contact, it flies to a new planet. And when she doesn't, it doesn't. So with that being said, you have a freshman who's coming in to compete, who showed out great in fall ball. Talk about it. And that's a freshman just trying to bite to play. And you did have Patty saying that you'll know her name from day one. So I would make my prediction in terms of the catcher that you're going to see Kendall Wells, sort of come out and do that. Does Patty do something different? Does she let the veteran sort of lose it or win it? I don't know. But I'm going to go with the fact that if you're telling me I'm going to know somebody's name from day one, I'm seeing them day one in some capacity. So that would be my thing. But I love the fact that we have competition there. It's something that I feel like, K9 had it for so long. You make that switch. It feels sort of weird overall as a fan base when you don't see her right behind the plate. And now, we have good, solid, competition for her and Emmerling, and for both of them really to get better. So I'm pleased with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point that you make, just in terms of the competition wasn't what you would like. And I think there was a lot of concern last year, should Emmerling get hurt, what does that catcher position look like with, Corey Hicks obviously is transferred over to Clemson, but, kind of looked like maybe she wasn't ready for what that would look like. But yeah, I think having the competition there is good. And, Kendall Wells, she was the number one catcher in the class for a reason, right? It's hard to keep talent like that on the bench, especially for a long period of time. She had 7 home runs in the fall ball, so she kind of came as advertised, so to speak. So, but yeah, I think that will be really interesting to see how that works in terms of the dynamic. You could see a scenario, like you said, where Patty kind of goes with the experience early on, right? But I think if all things being equal, if they're really neck and neck, or obviously Kendall has won the position, then obviously I think she would get the nod going into that. So yeah, I think that's another. And again, I think that's one thing that Kendall Wells would get a good. Both girls obviously, but Kendall will get a good opportunity to see some good pitches with all of the bats that Oklahoma has in the top half of that, 1 through 6 in the order. Can't really pitch around her with everyone else. So she'll certainly get those opportunities. And I know that the fan base was a little bit of a little concerned, right, with what Emerling was brought to the table last year. It was sort of I had kind of made the joke that Emerling was the epitome of swing hard in case you hit it, because there was, I think, 12, 13 home runs on the year, but I think she hit 212 overall. So I know that Patty and the team are probably looking for a little bit more consistency out of that position. But hey, when you replace a legend like K9, I think it's hard to, even if you're trying not to live up to some of those expectations on, because what that has looked like in the past. And K9, Kinsey Hanson's probably one of the best, maybe the best catcher to ever play the position at Oklahoma. So following that is no easy task. But yeah, I think a lot of people look at Kendall Wells could be one of the top freshmen of the year, especially at that position.
Absolutely. Also, K9 now being Kinsey McKenzie, having, just got married, I believe yesterday. So congrats to them as well. Let's move our focus over to the Circle, which also was a big talk of town, whether it be through acquisitions and just overall freshmen coming in. The Circle's deep, and it does have a lot of different faces, but it's also some of the same, right? When you have Deal, Lowry, things like that, some returners in that aspect. A couple questions came in. One, what is our 1 through 4, even though there's 6, just to give us a little bit of a room there. And then also, who would be our ace? So keep those question marks. I know we're going to answer as we go through, but I was talking to you a little bit about this before, but I do think that I would love to see Lowry sort of rise, because last year she, at the start, she's a freshman, sort of figuring her stuff out. She has some good stuff. She gets hurt and she struggled a little bit coming back, but then really found her stride towards the end. And I think this is now her time. She has the first season under her belt, went through the ups and downs. And, I know that Patty had mentioned, that she's starting to build in various different platforms, and she's really happy with her, the maturation this offseason. So in my opinion, like who do I think is going to start as the ace may not be who ends up being the full ace. But I'm curious on your thoughts. What do you think about the Circle?
Yeah, I think Jackie, when you look back at last year, obviously this team was very, very dependent on Sam Landry, especially in the postseason. And I know that, Patty and Jen just probably didn't have a lot of trust in anyone else, especially when it went to the postseason. I think Sam threw over 80% of the innings when you talk about the SEC tournament through the College World Series. So obviously it was a big point of emphasis to not only develop some of those young kids that they had, but go and get a couple in the transfer portal like they did with Berzon and Wachenio. So you alluded to this in the open that there's 6, right? So I think that the clear message here was that we need to make sure that we have, number one, we have competitive balance within the pitching staff. And I think number 2 is we can't rely on one single arm to get us through, because we saw in that Texas Tech game that Sam kind of lost some of that. She just got worn out, right? And I think whether Oklahoma would have forced an if game, I think it would have been one of those where I don't know how much she would have had left in the tank. So obviously you want to make sure that you've got that. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Lowry is one of the ones that you would look for, particularly how she performed in the fall, right? I think she had a little bit of a rough open to fall ball, but she was the most consistent pitcher throughout fall ball. And Patty was very vocal about that, talking about that. And I think she even had an interview that said she probably would be, and this was a month or so ago, but talking about she probably would be the person that's the ace right now. So I think you'd look for Deal to make another step as well. I think she talked about how much she's put in the offseason just in terms of the conditioning and being consistent, and she was really good in the fall as well. I think the thing with Deal is she doesn't get a lot of swing and misses, so she's got to be really pinpoint with her accuracy, hitting her spots and things like that. Now, I think Berzon is a little bit of a wild card, right? You don't know exactly how healthy she really is. I know that she did get roughed up a bit in the fall, but I think just watching that, I think they were trying some new mechanics and maybe even trying out some new pitches for her just to see how that looked. And, I mean, as good as Jen is from a pitching coach perspective, she'll put her in a position to be successful. So I would probably say those three, in my opinion, are probably your top three. I mean, at least going into the season, historically, Patty doesn't necessarily have an ace. I mean, she really goes with matchups more than an ace. But those are some of the three that I would think that you would see at least early on, more than anything. Wachenio is a little bit of a changeup. Coming out of a bullpen. Obviously, she'll get a lot of starts as well. But that's kind of the packing order that I would see. And then Alyssa Parker as well will get some chances against some opportunities early on. So I think, like I said, they've got the six that they have at their disposal to be able to, place where they think they fit success, just putting them in a position to be successful as much as possible. But yes, I think for me, just kind of looking at the season for Oklahoma, this is very clearly the biggest question mark, right? To get where they want to go. Do they have, because they're going to need 2 to 3 of these people to be able to step up and be consistent, and play exactly how and pitch how exactly they want them to pitch, especially with a much tougher SEC.
Mm-hmm. No, I do think that for me is this is how I say it. First off, for Oklahoma fans, she puts the ball in play, and so she sort of reminds me different, of course. Different, but in the aspect of Nicole May, right? Relies a little bit on your defense, drop ball type of, pitcher, and, keeps it low in the zone. But in order for her to survive fully, you need defense. And I think that also plays in the reason why you come to OU, right? Is, defense is a focus. So I don't want, people to assume that she's going to be the strikeout pitcher that comes from out, and that's not going to be always the case. But if she's on and both mentally, clearly, coming to a new team, coming from injury, things, all that type of stuff, all things that she experienced at her prior team, and she and Rocha does what Rocha does. I mean, she can very clearly be an ace. She was one of the top in the SEC, in her career at points. So for people asking, what's the 1 through 4, it's very hard right now because you have some. I mean, even from the pitcher who comes from Ole Miss, right? She is really talented and was really good, right? For one of the best freshman pitchers, right? In the SEC. So am I wrong on that one?
No, she was actually one publication had her as a freshman All-American last year. Yeah. So yeah, she started really strong. She did struggle a little bit towards the end of SEC season, but she was very good as a freshman for sure. Yeah.
And I think, refined, again, defense behind you, and just overall, outlook, they're going to get their rest if they need it. As long as that pen is performing, they'll be able to do what they need to stay through the season. The issue is that if half this pen is not, or more, is not performing, then you're going to start to rely on 1 or 2 arms again. And I think that's what we have tried to avoid by having this very deep pen who is a very different variety, right? Everybody's very different from one another. So I think that they can, at least take a deep breath that if they don't have their stuff, somebody else does. It's not all on them. And I think, Sam, at times last year, there was a little bit of pressure, right? Where it's like, you got to figure this out. And you're right, you did lose gas. So that's sort of what I'm looking for. I think once we see how they perform, at least opening weekend, I think based on the different matchups that we're going to see throughout the season, I think I could do a better 1 through 4, 1 through 6. But right now it's hard because you haven't even really seen them. But that's sort of my message in terms of, the circles, that we're going to have talent. We just have to let it sort itself out in terms of how that works and what these matchups look like. All right. We'll do one prediction in terms of in the first ASU game. We'll let the rest of the weekend play out how it does. I do think that we're going to see Deal versus Brown. And I just say that from a veteran perspective, throw her out there. Would I be shocked if she's not? Probably not. Just because we have some games against Arizona and things, and who knows how they want to set that up. But that would be my overall prediction. Great game for Sooner fans. Also, we'll talk about the schedule, but definitely one of the better games on opening day.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll go with Lowry just to change it up a little bit, Lowry. But yeah, I think, and I think it's hard to predict some of these games in terms of pitching matches against Oklahoma because we've seen a lot of these teams don't necessarily throw their ace against Oklahoma. I mean, you would assume that. I mean, I believe Arizona State has a game earlier in the day. I think they play Toledo earlier in that day before they play Oklahoma, which is I think at 7:15 Central Time on Thursday. So it'll be. I mean, I expect that Arizona State would throw Kinsey Brown in that one, but you really never know. Some of these teams, I think we can get into this a little bit, but a lot of these teams really look at they don't want to show their aces a ton in the regular season and save them for teams that they might face in the postseason. So, but I do think it's early enough that you'll probably see Kinsey Brown throw against Oklahoma.
Absolutely. So pumped to see it. I can't wait for it to start. All right, everybody, moving on. If you're not an Oklahoma fan, I hope that you enjoyed a little bit of it. If you are an Oklahoma fan, I hope you enjoyed our breakdown. But we're moving on to our topics. First one of the day. What's up? No. So what's your overall softball fans need to know?
I had two things as I was kind of thinking about this. I mean, and we wrote a little bit of an article on this, just a shameless plug over at Softball America, but we really just kind of talking about a new national order. So a lot of the topic has been Texas Tech, Texas, and Oklahoma, and then sort of the rest of the college softball landscape. So I think it'll be interesting to see, for me at least, how the rest of the field performs relative to those kind of top three that are really kind of on the mountaintop. And I think most people that look at these rosters for Oklahoma, Texas Tech, and Texas, obviously having Nyjah at the top is a little bit of a kind of an equalizer in terms of what that looks like. But having those three teams feel like maybe they're a little bit above the rest. Obviously, you got like teams like Tennessee and Oregon, Florida State that are up there as well that will obviously have an opportunity to compete. But I think that's one thing for me. And then the other thing is this won't come into play until postseason, but now this year, from a college softball perspective, from the NCAA tournament, the first 32 teams will be seeded, which is different. This is the first year that we've had this. They're really taking it from volleyball has had this for a while as well. So it'll be interesting to me to see exactly what that looks like from a postseason perspective. Does it change a whole lot? I do think it gives a little bit of an advantage for some of these mid-major teams that were sort of just forced into brackets based on regional, geography, so to speak. And I think that travel rule will still, that mileage rule will still be in place, but I think you'll get a little bit more even brackets than maybe we have had in the past. So those are just a couple of things that off the top from my perspective that I had been looking at in terms of some of the top storylines coming into the season.
And there's also one thing with some rule changes and so on. I know that they put out towards the end of the last season or pretty quick after that there's going to have a safety bag. So that's across the NCAA. That is not conference based. So you will see sort of at first this duo bag, and that's for safety reasons, just with the collisions at first and so on. That was made universal for at least Division I. I'm not sure if it continued to 2 and 3, but for at least all Division I institutions, that has to be there. So if you see that it is usually a different color. Sometimes I've seen it, some like orange and things like that. So that it's clear, but you will see it's just to the right of first. So it's almost like attached in a way. And how it looks. And then I know that there was the update to the obstruction rule in terms of just having a little clarity on it. And that was, I believe you mentioned it before, something about not obstructing a different part of it, or their foot has to be a certain place or something.
Yeah, I think really last year it was really there was a lot of discussion about making sure that you're not like blocking the leading edge of the plate or the leading edge of the base, and so I think they've sort of taken some of the interpretation out of the rule and made it a little bit more black and white. I mean, I think the obstruction rule is really the biggest, I think, point of contention in terms of just kind of watching watching that in terms of like officiating and things like that, that a lot of people just get enraged about just the inconsistency. So I think doing everything that they can to kind of take the decision making, so to speak, out of the officials' hands and just make it very black and white in terms of, okay, if they do this, this, and this, then it's obstruction. If they don't, then it's not. So obviously, the umpires are human. There still will be some of those things where fans disagree. But yeah, I think they did whatever they could to, I think, make that a little bit more transparent for everyone.
Absolutely. And there is also the amount of people who tag Jen Trotter in messages every time there's an obstruction is my favorite because you just immediately know when you open X that something happened at home plate. So definitely one of my favorite parts, but also most frustrating parts of the season. All right, so let's go on to our number 2. What does opening weekend look like? So I've charted out for myself Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Okay, so I'll name a little bit of some of the games in case there are some people who have reached out through DM, things like that, and saying, "Hey, which games are you watching?" Because the slate is huge. If you look at it, first day opening day Thursday is really, it's shorter compared to the others, but you do have some good games. You have Virginia Tech, South Carolina. That's sick. First one will be Eastern Standard Time. Second will be Central, just because that's where I'm at. So 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 Central. Mississippi State, Baylor, 7:30, 6:30. OU, Arizona State, 8:15, 7:15, and Oklahoma State, Stanford, 9-8. That's my slate for Thursday. Talk about, it's probably, like I said, the smallest, but some big games. Top 25 game with Virginia Tech, South Carolina. Mississippi State, Baylor I put on because you just never underestimate Glenn Moore. And I want to see a little bit more consistency out of Ricketts over there at Mississippi State. OU, Arizona State, we talked about in length a little bit in terms of big game for an opening, especially for OU to battle that quick. And Oklahoma State, Stanford, I'll talk a little bit more later. But big test for the Cowgirls over there in California. So something to look at and look at what Stanford overall looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are a lot of the games that I kind of had circled on my side as well. I think just in terms of tournaments, if you want to look at that, so it's kind of funny that this ends up being one of the bigger ones, but it's the UTSA tournament where you have Texas playing Nebraska twice. Nebraska's playing Washington, so I think those are some really good matchups, and I'll get into that in terms of when we talk about one of our other topics here. But the NFCA Leadoff Classic, I think, is the big tournament this weekend. That's in Clearwater this weekend as well, obviously before the Real Clearwater Invitational. But a couple of really, really good matchups there. You've got, I think this is on Friday. It looks like Oregon is facing Clemson. Liberty is playing Tennessee. Liberty plays Clemson. And then Saturday, you've got, and some of these games are actually, which is great to see. A few of these games, I believe there's 4 of these games that are actually televised on MLB Network, which is, again, like incredible for the sport, right? To just kind of build the sport and things like that. Oregon plays Liberty, or Auburn is playing Clemson on Saturday, and that's one of the games that's actually going to be televised by the MLB Network. Tennessee and Oregon, which is potentially the best game of the weekend just overall, right? In terms of like preseason rankings, like Tennessee and Oregon are really, in most publications, are 4 and 5 right there. So I think it's cool to see that we get these matchups early on in college softball, and it's pretty much every week, like with some of these big time tournaments. So it's really, really fun to watch some of the best teams play each other. Obviously, they get better as the season goes on, but challenging each other with some of these tough schedules early on in the year, it's really exciting for us as at the end of the day, softball fans watching.
Agreed. I do want to point out one game that I think on Saturday that is probably not going to be on everyone's radar. Clearly, if you're somebody who's been sort of breaking down the schedule, it may have appeared to you, but Belmont, Georgia, and that's a Saturday game. I'm really intrigued by that game because, right, you do have their ace who stayed, had taken multiple trips around state, and Georgia who has some hype, right? They had a big transfer with Fisher coming on over, and I think their opening weekend schedule is not the greatest, but I do think that's a decent test in terms of a good arm and an experienced arm to see what their bats look like. One other one that I'm going to mention is also, I think, an interesting game is Oregon-Mizzou. Only because that is, you do have Penn State, Mizzou. I'm not sure if they'll hold their ace. I believe it's McCannon for Missouri, who is lights out and will be, back. And everyone's sort of waiting for her return. I feel like it's like Batman's return. And to see what that looks like, to see if Mizzou is truly going to rise, and it's one game, I get it. But it is something that will give a test to both sides. In which you said, you even mentioned, with Tennessee playing Oregon, so on. They have a big opening slate this weekend, so they're going to really get tested. But there are definitely games throughout. I highly suggest to the fans. There are a lot of things. Like if you go, I was in a space this week and I was just using ESPN, and it cut out about half of the games. In my opinion, if you don't have a pay site and you're looking for something free, and you're just trying to find all the games that are happening in the scores, you can also use the NCAA scoreboard. It's a little hectic, sometimes delayed and not fabulous, but it still has the whole schedule of every team Division I playing. So, look and try and plan out. That being said, it also doesn't provide you where it's being played. So it may not have ESPN, it may not have Flow or the 1,000 different things, Game Changer and everything else. But it at least will give you an idea of who's playing. So if you are interested in sort of mapping out yourself, that's where I would go if you don't have any type of pay site or any availability like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Game Changer because all of the NSC Leadoff Classic games will be on Game Changer.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's probably not the best app, right? But I think it's every one of those games will be televised or streaming, should say, through that app. So if you're looking for that, if you're just an overall college, national college softball fan, make sure you have that ready for Thursday through Sunday.
And there are some pay sites, that are around, Softball America, right, as one of them that do host different types of scoreboards and different aspects of things and tracks, whether it be on their website or through X, all the different things that are happening. But that being said, if you don't have access to that stuff, there is an option. All right, moving on. So this sort of, it sort of goes hand in hand with schedules, but teams that need to have a good opening weekend. And so for me, I have Oklahoma State. And the reason for that is based on what the rest of their schedule looks like. So, it's intense because they first have this weekend where they have Stanford, right? And then they have a couple of Cal, I believe. So in my opinion, they need to win the weekend because this is what they have at Clearwater the following weekend: Georgia, LSU, Texas A&M, UCLA, and Duke. So a top 25 slate immediately. And so if you lose this weekend and you go into next weekend and you don't win a majority, there's a lot of questions, and their schedule, while they're, in 2 weeks from Clearwater, they have Nebraska, essentially a series. They play them 3 times. Then they have a series with Arizona State, sort of after that at some point. They don't have Tech this year. So that's a little bit of a reprieve, but they still see teams like, one game series with Texas, with Oklahoma. So you don't want the wheels to fall off too early. And that's if they don't have some confidence going into Clearwater, right, they're going to need to really win in Clearwater to sort of get that going into Nebraska, because Nebraska's pretty stacked this year. They did what they needed to help Jordy in her last year. And they're expected to be a top 25 team, potentially more or higher, right, overall when it's said and done. And I just think that it's extremely important that they build the confidence before they go on. Because I'm just not sure what happens if you lose there and you lose in Clearwater and then at Nebraska. You got to do really well in the Big 12.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I this was one of the teams that, as we talked about, I had circled as well. Stanford is a top 25 team. So, ironically enough, this is the post-Nyjah period for Stanford, but they had one of the best offenses in the country last year. So, I think it's going to be really important, not only to get off to a good start, to your point, but just kind of looking at it more in a more detailed level. I think there's a lot of concerns just about Oklahoma State in general, right? Like last year was the first year they didn't make the Women's College World Series, and I believe they had made it like 5 straight years before then. So then they lost in the Arkansas Regional, and I think just generally looking at the outlook of the season, I think there's a lot of like hesitancy. I think in most publications they're ranked in the the bottom 5 of the top 25, but I think really big for them is going to be the pitching depth, right? I mean, outside of Ruby Malin, they really struggled, so they're going to need to have Riley Crandall be really good. And then they lost a couple of their bats in the portal. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think it'll be very very important for them to. I mean, I think at the very least, Jackie, not for them to have a losing weekend, right? They can't get swept by Stanford. They can't. If they get swept by Stanford, they've got to make up for it and sweep Cal. But those are 4 of their 5. I can't remember. San Jose State, I think, is the other team that they play. But they gotta. I mean, you got to look at a split. So I think if they can get to 3-2, at least 3-2, 4-1 after the weekend, I think they've got to be thinking pretty good about themselves. So for me, I had Nebraska. I mean, you talk about a team that is challenging themselves in the non-conference. I mean, I think it was very clear where they got seeded, where they did last year was because of their low SOS in the regular season, and they've clearly made a decision to up that up tremendously. So if they're not in a position to be a top 16 seed this upcoming season, it won't be for lack of trying. So they've got a pair against Washington. They play Washington on Friday and Sunday, and then Saturday they have a Friday and Saturday they play Texas. So this is in that UTSA Invitational. So I mean, kind of the same thought, Jackie, that you had with Oklahoma State. They in Clearwater they have LSU, Georgia, Tennessee, UCF, and Texas Tech, right?
Oh,
and then they're in the Mary Nutter, and they have South Carolina, and they have Texas A&M. And then you had mentioned that tournament that they have with Oklahoma State, where they play Oklahoma State 3 times. So, and then they have Omaha, which is not a pushover. Now the conference schedule does get a little bit easier. They miss Oregon. They only play UCLA in conference schedule. So really, really big for Nebraska to get off to a good start. They have, obviously, if not the best, one of the best players, all-around players in the country, and Jordy Fromm is her new last name. So make sure I remember to call her by her proper name. But so, they didn't lose a whole lot. They lost 2 players out of the from a graduation perspective. They replaced those. I believe it was a catcher and an outfielder. They replaced those in the portal. So really pretty much the same team that they had year ago. To me, clearly the biggest concern in seeing how they navigate this is how do they pitch in Jordy's non-starts, right? Can they give her the support that she needs? Obviously, they're going to rely on her in the postseason being as good as she is, right? But how do they navigate this tough schedule with especially some of these good teams that they're playing in back-to-back situations with? I mean, we know that they're going to be able to hit the ball. One of the best offenses in the country a year ago, top 5 overall. But being able to replicate that this year, and then also being able to give Jordy the support that she needs from a bench perspective will be very, very important for this team.
Absolutely. In terms of Nebraska, they have the hype, right? I think one of the big aspects for them is they've been building with Jordy, on their roster for a little bit. And I think now that they've had their acquisitions with Hannah Core and the rest, I think that there is a lot of belief in them. And so if you go out in an opening weekend and you hit the bed, it's rough. And the rankings will show that quickly. They'll be like, you know what? We overestimated real bad, And so I worry for them in that aspect. That being said, they have a lot of veteran, leadership there and some darn good players. I'm not expecting them to really fully get swept away, and maybe they lose a game, hopefully by 1 or 2 runs. But I want them not necessarily to dominate the weekend, but I want them to get through it on the winning side because you're right. Just like Oklahoma State, they have a gauntlet with Tech, which is wild that following weekend. So, it's important. Some of these teams, you say, okay, like even I look at Oklahoma, if we just don't fare well, you have the whole SEC, right, to go against, and you're consistently hitting these top 25 teams where you can sort of rebound, right? But some don't have that, and that's Nebraska. While they are putting themselves in a great space, SOS, if they continue to win, they'll hit that schedule, that Big Ten, and then questions at that point. So I agree. They're one. I also had, just for the fans' sake, Missouri, because they're a big slate this weekend as well. So definitely some teams to watch, and we'll just watch Clearwater next weekend. Essentially, if you want to see what that looks like, because it is a gauntlet. So moving on to our fourth and final, our dark horse. So I'll start it off. My dark horse is Auburn. Let me get my notepad out. Let me tell you why, Jason. So first off, I do think that if you look at last year, right, and you look really at where Auburn was and whether or not they outkicked their coverage, essentially they did, right? They far outperformed what many people thought they would, especially with everything and the questions with S.J. Guerin, transferring from Oklahoma, and what was that going to look like? So I sort of broke everything down. Auburn last season, by their stats online, 35-24, 19-9 at home, so solid home record. 5-12 away, so we can clearly see what needs to adjust. And in the SEC, it was 6-18. Neutral site, 11-3. When I look at SJ, right, her ERA on the season 2.97, SEC 5.25. So clearly, there's a few reasons for that. Not like, oh, wow, her talent level just dropped in the SEC. There's always a little bit of hardship because you are going against top 25 teams there every weekend. But you're also probably seeing her twice a weekend, and there's a lot of fatigue with that, right? So you're going to have that natural drop-off. Her, co-pitcher, I like to say, Rainey, was 4.2 overall and 5.59. So she sort of stayed a little steady. You can see a little drop-off to the SEC play, but nothing huge. Now, why do I think that they're the dark horse in all of this? Well, they had an acquisition, right? So you get Ella Harrison from Rutgers, who I think was really overlooked, not necessarily by softball media, right? But by fans, and maybe because Rutgers, they were actually doing pretty good because of her in terms of play. But, it's just in that region of the country, you're not seeing the softball as much in terms of, the SEC pockets, the Big 12 pockets, and so on. But we can't forget her because she did have a 2.61 ERA. And so if they can have a second pitcher who can uplift and help SJ and take a little load off, I think the pen is better. Big question. Hitting, right? Can they bat? And I think that's, they do have some veterans who are coming back, and they have a ton of freshmen. So it could be a little bit of a sore spot for them. But I think if Ella and SJ can keep themselves above water and stay competitive, I do think they're really well coached. Their pitching coach is fabulous, and he was just done a fabulous job with SJ. And I suspect that with Ella as well, who didn't even hit near her ceiling because of an injury. So she was out actually for a little bit of the Big Ten play. So I think that there's a lot to grow from there. And to me, the scariest teams are those that have a lot of growth opportunity. And so from, that in my world, I'm going to put them as a dark horse. Do I think they're going to make the Women's College World Series? I don't know. But I think that they are going to, again, supersede expectations and maybe have a few upsets that people aren't thinking of.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good pick, Jackie. I mean, I think looking just overall looking at them, I think the Malvos are a really good tandem from a coaching perspective. So I think getting just the leadership that they have there, I think is going to be excellent. So yeah, I could certainly see that happening as well. I'm going to go off the radar just a bit with mine. So I'm going to say North Carolina. And so what I mean by a dark horse team, is this to your point, is this a team that's going to make the College World Series? No, I don't think so. Now, I do think if things go their way, they could potentially be a team that could possibly get to a super. I mean, I think they're going to have some things go their way. But I think one of the primary reasons I have for this is, for Jackie, is just the schedule. From a non-conference perspective, they will not face a ranked team until March 6th. So they're going to have a full month of the season to, I'm not going to say beat up on teams, but they should have a big opportunity, just kind of counting the games up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
It's not out of the realm of possibility for them to be 23-0 before they start conference season. So let me just quickly run down.
Mm-hmm.
St. Joe's, Radford, James Madison, Connecticut, Elon, Coastal Carolina, Bryant, Monmouth, Bryant again, Monmouth, Northern Kentucky, Radford again, North Carolina Central twice, Rider, Appalachian State, Princeton, Rider, Elon, and then they start ACC play with Boston College, and then they have Stetson in a midweek before they host Virginia. That's their first, and Virginia's kind of a fringe top 25 team right there. So first 23 games of the season, no ranked teams. Schedule, obviously, when they get into ACC play, it gets tough. They've got Virginia, they've got Stanford. They have a couple of midweeks with Arizona State, a couple of midweeks with Liberty. And they end the season pretty tough. They go to Duke and go to Florida State and go to Virginia Tech. So those are three really tough 3-game series road trips. But again, they lost a decent amount of offense, but they gained a lot. They've got 6. They had 6 pickups from the portal. I think their problem was last year really just kind of the pitching depth. So they've got some experience in the circle that they got last year. And like I said, they've got 6 portal additions, 3 of which are from NC State. So they have experience in the ACC. So yeah, I think this is, like I said, this is not necessarily a team that I think has the ability to, necessarily win the ACC, has the ability to get to the Women's College World Series, but I think it is a team that can make some noise. And again, a more experienced team, and just in terms of building the program, right? I think we had talked about in the Open before we went on that North Carolina got to the NCAA tournament this past year for the first time since 2019. So being able to kind of build on that success and things like that, just needing another team, another solid team in the ACC. So yeah, we'll see how they do. Another team that I had circled is Washington, right? So I think certain people, feel a certain way about Heather Tarr, but she has been successful, obviously in Washington. Had a couple of down years over the last few years, but has some really young talent. With Alexis DeBoer, was Big Ten Freshman of the Year last year. Morgan Reimer came over, was really forced to do a little bit more in her freshman year than she anticipated. So having a year of experience has Washington that does have a bona fide ace. And we've talked about this, right? But the Big Ten is probably down in terms of competitive depth across the conference as opposed to the ACC, the Big 12, maybe not necessarily the Big 12, but certainly the ACC and the SEC, right? Mm-hmm. So, you've got Oregon and you've got UCLA and Washington right there, along with Nebraska. So have a chance to be in the upper half of that league. But yeah, interesting to see if they continue to progress because they've got they've got some of the key components to that, but just they had to be really, really young. They lost a ton off of that team last year, and then just kind of learned as they went. So now it'll be interesting for me to just kind of watch and see if that experience helps them as they really shift or really forced into playing earlier than they were probably ready for at times. But to see how that goes will be fun to watch.
I think a lot of people are underestimating Washington because the little whispers from over there and from people around the softball world is they're very cautious to be critical because they've seen a lot of development and a lot of good things come out of there. So I do think that they're, we say dark horse, I'm going to say the wild horse is we have zero idea how they're going to come through this weekend, but they have some big tests. So, it will be interesting to see how they fare as well. I could have easily put them as, they need to have a big opening weekend as well because of some of these teams that they face. But I do agree. I think that there is a large amount of people that are underestimating truly where Washington can be. Now, that being said, who knows, right? It can, seesaw can go both ways. Either it's going to be a little bit of a downfall, or they're going to steadily rise, they're on the other end. But it will be interesting to see. So first off, Jason, thanks again always for being here with me, always supporting me, and always supporting from the stands. So I appreciate you. To all of our fans, From the Stand Softball, SB. If you want to find us on our socials, we are mainly on X. We do have a Patreon. It is free. And the reason for that is because we want to offer free things to you. It is run by the fans for the fans. Okay. So that is the aspect of it. Is it something that is as spun up as some of our media sites? No, because we are all fans watching, and we are all fans sort of creating our own thoughts and collecting data and stats and everything. But it is something that will provide you free stuff and free interactions with other fans. So like I said, if you're unable to, I always say, please support our pay sites if you are able to, because it does help and support the game. And in the end, it filters to players and player opportunities, jobs, things like that down the line. But if this needs to be your bridge to a pay site and you're grasping for more, feel free to sign up for the Patreon. Like I said, free of charge. Okay. Everybody, we'll see you next week on From the Stands and The Shift with both Jason Rhea and myself, Jackie Winz. Have a good one. See you later, everybody.